Sangati by Bama is a work of Dalit literature set in Tamil Nadu, India. It's at once a bleak portrayal of an oppressed and marginalised community, and at the same time can be read as defiant and liberating. The title is translated into English simply as Events, and the events described in the novel are very much those of the everyday and often overwhelmingly physical reality of the women in this community. Welcome to the World Literature Podcast. My name's Ivan Stacey, and on this channel we discuss literature from around the world, delving into the places, people and ideas that are brought to life in fiction, drama and poetry. In each episode I invite an expert to give their views on a text or author, and today I'm joined by Dr. Runa Chakraborty Paunksnis from Kaunas University of Technology in Lithuania. I hope our conversation sparks your interest in reading Sangati, and please leave a comment if you have anything to say about this important work of Dalit literature. Welcome to this episode of the World Literature Podcast. Today I'll be discussing Sangati by Bama with Dr. Runa Chakraborty Paunksnis. Runa teaches in Kaunas University of Technology in Lithuania. She's previously worked in India and Bhutan and was a visiting fellow at the Centre for the Study of Discrimination and Exclusion in Jawaharlal Nehru University. She was co-editor of Gender, Cinema, Streaming Platforms, Shifting Frames in Neoliberal India, which was published by Palgrave Macmillan in 2023. Her edited anthology, Trauma, Protest, Transcendence, Voice of a Bengali Dalit Playwright, which is a collection of 4 plays by the Dalit playwright Raju Das, was also published last year. And it's Dalit literature that's the subject of today's discussion. So, Runa, thank you so much for joining me and a very warm welcome.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, Ivan, for inviting me to this podcast.
My pleasure also. So could you maybe start just by telling us a little bit about Sangati and why you think people might be interested in reading it?
Well, first and foremost, Sangati was originally published in Tamil in 1994. And this was the second work by the author Bama. By the way, Bama is her pen name. She was born as Faustina Mary Fatima Rani in a Roman Catholic family in a village in Tamil Nadu, which is located in the southern part of India. She is also known as Bama Faustina Susairaj. Well, coming back to Sangati, why it's important and why people read Sangati is that this is a book about a community. To be more precise, the women of a particular Dalit Christian community that Bama was familiar with. And this is all about the everyday existence of these women, how they live, how they actually celebrate life, and at the same time how they struggle against different structures of oppression. So it's all about their everyday existence, and we don't get to see this side of life so much in the mainstream literary discourse, because this is all about Dalit lives, and Dalit lives, as you know, it's marginalized almost always. Nowadays we are talking a lot about Dalit literature, but back then when Bama was writing, it was not so much in the limelight, though Dalit movement was very much at the forefront. Also here we get to see a lot of this intersection of different social categories like caste, class, religion, gender, and all in together. And how these women are not just fighting against these structures of oppression, but also at the same time they are celebrating their life, which I think is the hallmark of this book. And this is something that we should keep in mind. We have a set mindset that Dalit lives are always traumatized, and we are looking for that trauma in that. We often forget that there is an agency involved in that. So in that respect, this is a unique book.
Okay. Thank you for that introduction. And clearly, we're talking about a Dalit text, and this is a term people may have heard, but I'm sure a lot of people are only familiar in a very passing way with what this means. So I think it would be helpful maybe if you could start by saying a little bit about the status and situation of the Dalit community, or communities maybe. I don't know if the situation is uniform, you know.
Actually, it's a very interesting question. The question cannot be answered, though, in a very straightforward manner. First and foremost, I would like to say that the term Dalit does not denote any caste category. If you are familiar with the Chaturvarna system that's mentioned in the ancient Hindu scriptures, there are 4 varnas, and Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Sudra. And there is no mention of any particular caste category called Dalit. In fact, the term was used much later. In Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's writings and speeches, we get to hear the word Dalit. And however, I would say the term gained a lot of traction in the second half of the 20th century, to be more precise, 1970s, when Dalit Panthers movement was very much there and very much prominent as a social movement. They simply kind of they took the word Dalit and modified it in a more positive way. Now, if we look at the term Dalit, it's literally it means someone who is held under check, or you can say metaphorically someone who is suppressed, oppressed. But when Dalit Panthers movement took this word, they not only expanded the term, they included other marginalized categories, for example, working class people, women, and scheduled tribes into that fold, but also they kind of gave it a positive light. So Dalit does not mean someone who is just suppressed or oppressed, but Dalit is also one who protests against the structures of oppression. So you can say there is a revolutionary fervor attached to this term Dalit. So, but yeah, it is, and but we can see that in the popular discourse nowadays, Dalit basically refers to a particular community which was considered untouchable in the earlier times. Now, untouchable not in the way Western discourse thinks untouchable, but untouchable the way people are. There were people and communities who used to be considered polluting, and that's why they were excluded from the mainstream life. They were not allowed to participate in the communities, the collective affairs. Often these communities were asked to live at the periphery of the village or the town, wherever they were. So a lot of sanctions were imposed on them. So in that way, untouchable. And now, according to the Constitution of India, untouchability, or the practice of untouchability, is forbidden. But in reality, you'd see that there are many people who still practice untouchability. And that's why I said it is very difficult to answer this question in a straightforward manner.
Okay.
Again, for example, let's say, according to the Constitution of India, violence against Dalit people was mostly legally known as the scheduled caste communities. Violence against these people is forbidden, but according to the National Crime Records Bureau, the cases of atrocities against Dalit people and Dalit communities are, or rather have risen significantly. Okay. So two sides always there. And at the same time, there are many affirmative actions. Benefits are given to these communities. And I can say that as a result of that, maybe that many Dalit people or many people belonging to the scheduled caste communities, they work in public and private sector. They work in the railways, in bank, in educational institutes, organizations, private organizations. But at the same time, we hear cases where this workplace pressures were, kind of imposed on them, segregation, caste discrimination, humiliation based on their caste status is very much prevalent. And if you think about Dalit women, then they face even harsher kind of discrimination when it comes to Dalit women. So in that way, I would say that the status and situation, if you want to have that in mind, the kind of heterogeneous context we live in, that it's quite difficult to say it in one word. What is the status of the situation of Dalit people?
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, earlier you mentioned the point about intersections between, for example, caste and other aspects of identity, and you just touched on gender. The novel's very consciously written from a female perspective, and addresses the role of women as well. So do you consider it to be a feminist text? And that word itself, I mean, can mean different things in different contexts. You know, different waves of feminist theory have sort of reacted against, you know, white liberal Western feminism. Okay, so that question itself perhaps is quite complex. But you know, do you regard it as a feminist text? If so, in what way? And you know, could you say something about how issues of gender do intersect with issues of caste as well? Both in general,
Absolutely.
and in the novel specifically, yeah.
Yeah, actually, absolutely. I would say that Sangati is a Dalit feminist text for me. And well, since you can see, as you mentioned, the intersection of gender, caste, class, religion, and all these, you know, social categories, overlapping social categories actually are intersecting in a very interesting way here. In fact, there is a debate around this need for having, let's say, a Dalit feminist aesthetic to understand the predicament of Dalit women. This debate has been going on now for a very, very long time. In fact, we see this whole trajectory there since 1990s. And a text like Sangati actually underlines the importance of having this kind of a debate, where we get to see that the trauma faced by Dalit women is not exactly the kind of trauma maybe faced by an upper caste woman. And here comes this question of, you know, kind of thinking about Dalit women as a category. Though Dalit woman definitely is not a homogeneous category. It is a heterogeneous category. But at the same time, if we have in mind the African-American feminist tradition, we can also use it in this context and say that a Dalit woman's experience of violence, of marginalization, discrimination is very different from the kind of experience that an upper caste woman endures. So in this text, actually, we see that how these multiple narratives are intersecting, how these Dalit women, Dalit Christian women rather, of this particular community, how they are kind of, you know, facing oppression from different angles, from different sources. So Bama, Bama condemns this Brahminical patriarchy in this text, but at the same time, she also criticizes the prevalence of patriarchal norms within the Dalit community. And at the same time, she also criticizes the way upper caste women, they insult Dalit women. And interestingly, we can see that how Dalit women within that community, some of them internalize these patriarchal norms and work against the emancipation of Dalit women. So different layers are there. And because of that, I would definitely call it as a Dalit feminist text.
Yeah.
And it kind of gives us this, you know, scope, this opportunity to talk about the agency that Dalit women have. And
yeah, and I mean, you referred to it earlier as a kind of celebratory text, but not straightforwardly. So I think there are certainly passages where you have women sort of sniping at each other and pulling each other down as well. You mentioned Christianity as well, and that takes us on to another aspect of identity. You know, this is a Christian community, and there are a few passages where the characters have to sort of negotiate between what we might think of as different belief systems. And although it's a Christian community, it's, you know, reading it, to me, it seemed that that belief system wasn't particularly ingrained. So to give one example, there's a scene where they're doing the nativity play in the church, but the sort of Christian message, if you like, seems to not particularly be a concern as much as the costumes. It seems, my reading of it was that women are not allowed to perform as well, and they're looking for a white-skinned actor to play Mary. So how, you know, in a passage like that, for example, how's the religious framework and other issues working together? I was reading it, and when I was reading that passage, I was feeling there are things I'm not getting here. Could you maybe shed light on what's going on in a passage like that a bit more?
Sure, sure. Actually, yeah. If you, it's very interesting that you said that you couldn't relate to it because maybe you are coming from a different background, and maybe the way the belief system about Christianity that are ingrained in you are very different in this context. First and foremost, I'll tell you this, that Sangati is very candid when it comes to the question of discrimination that Dalit women encounter within the church, within the convent sometimes. In fact, you know that Bama, she was born in a Roman Catholic family. She went to a nunnery, but then she was disappointed with the way nunnery functioned, and she left convent because of this kind of discriminatory attitude that she encountered there towards Dalits. So in Sangati also, she mentioned how Dalit women were always given the meanest jobs in the church. And also, she said that women were not allowed to enter the sacristy. When even a small boy was allowed to enter the sacristy, women were not allowed to enter. And the parish priests were not always sympathetic towards women regarding their individual choices of their life partners. And the divorce law was also a bit rigid in that context. So all these examples Bama actually gives us here to talk about the discrimination that was prevalent in church, and I believe to some extent is prevalent in church. And particularly about the nativity play that you mentioned here, it is actually very, very remarkable in the way that this search for a male actor, a light-skinned male actor to play the role of Mary, it indicates that the ingrained nature of patriarchy within the church. In fact, if you remember that passage, you'd remember that how first they were looking for baby Jesus, who should be a male child and light-skinned as well. And there was no male child available. And that's why ultimately they were forced to take a female child to play the role of baby Jesus. But they didn't compromise with the role of Mary. And they actually got hold of a man, a light-skinned man, to play the role of Mary. So actually, this is why I say remarkable, because most of these people, they were converted to Christianity at one point of time when the Christian missionaries came. And this reference is also given in the text. During the time of Bama's grandmother and the narrator's grandmother's time here, we saw that how Christian missionaries came and they assured these people that they would have a better life, which they were not having within the fold of Hinduism. So they converted from Hinduism to Christianity. But in spite of that, we see that religion continued to be an oppressive force in their life. So religion here plays a very different role. If you look at it from your perspective, perhaps you wouldn't understand why they were so preoccupied with this clothing, actor, and their gender. But this is something that is their everyday reality. So probably that's why women talking more about that rather than about the principles, the message of nativity play.
And I wonder, I mean, just following on from that, I wonder about, as I mentioned, I was reading this and feeling, this distance. There are things, that obviously when you're reading, we're on the World Literature Podcast, I think people are interested in this, of reading text deliberately from other parts of the world, and you're reading historical, local context that maybe, of course, you don't understand. That's part of the reason why you read. But I was just thinking as you answered that, what, it's possible to misread context in terms of understanding what's happening, but also in terms of mood. I mean, I read in general the mood of the novel is quite bleak and quite dark, despite moments of sort of, use the word celebratory. There are moments, this kind of upsurge of energy. Are there other bits of are there sort of comic nods to things people would recognize or experiences people would recognize, where maybe the reader who knows that stuff would be smiling, that maybe I'm missing, or not so much, or is it darker than that generally?
Well, yeah, you may say that definitely the mood is bleak, and but at the same time, as I mentioned, that I would consider the text as a very celebratory text, because usually women, and I mean, generally speaking, women's lives are not very much celebrated in texts. And if you look at even world literature, the kind of, if you're talking about women's agency, always we get to see the traumatized part of it. But the fact that women have their agency and they can assert themselves, that is not very much, celebrated in the text, especially when it comes to the lives of Dalit women. Always, whatever we have seen so far is that how Dalit women's lives are actually subject to various structures of oppression, how they suffer, that they're the victims of the system. That is given more prominence than the fact that they themselves can assert, and they actually can tell their own stories, which is very important, which is itself is quite agentic if you see it from that point of view, that they are telling their own stories. And that is something that I find in Sangati, and that is pretty empowering if you and that's why I consider it as a Dalit feminist text. About this comic reliefs, if you talk about this comic mood that is there, for example, at times they are that I feel when the narrator's grandmother is talking and she is constantly digressing to other incidents, other references, and of course that's very much integral part of women's narrative, digression, and that definitely is not conforming to a kind of aesthetic given by the male narrative. So here we see that she's constantly digressing and at times talking about certain incidents, for example, about a particular character, that how this character's name, the character is, he has some, teeth kind of protruded, and how that character's name became like that because of his teeth and things like that. Or incidents they are talking about some spirits, some ghosts and possessions, and these are there, and that this novel is replete with examples where women are celebrating different festivals, songs are being sung, and that mood is very joyous mood. And I think that these are the moments that would make you feel good about the novel, not just the overall bleakness, though it is very much there, looming large over the text, as you see.
Yeah. But I suppose we should say, so the word Sangati, am I correct, that simply means events?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the title, the English translation, the title you see is Sangati events, right? And I mean, the events that happen are not sort of, this is not world historical big events on the political stage that are going to make the news. It's very much confined to the community, right? So do you think, you talk about agency, do you think that works on two levels, a celebration of agency in the sense that this is being written by Dalit women, but also agency in the sense of shaping lives in that very kind of domestic and kind of a quotidian everyday sphere? Is that what you mean when you're talking about the celebration of agency?
Yeah, actually, yes. See, in fact, when you look at this part, events, yes, Sangati means events and escaped in the translation. And in the literal sense of the term, it might seem like it's not some big events that the text is talking about. But as I say, that these small everyday incidents that are happening in their lives and the way they're affecting their lives, that itself is an event, that if you look at it as an eventful thing, that definitely is an eventful thing. Now, maybe, when they're talking about this kind of sexual exploitation that's happening, like, for example, there are passages where the women are talking about the danger of going into the fields because the upper caste men would then sexually exploit them. But they are saying it in a very casual manner because that's their everyday experience. But isn't that an event? in a woman's life, that how she is being exploited, and that itself is an event that indicates the kind of structure, the society we are living in, where a woman's freedom is curtailed. But it is so everyday experience for them that it is part of their conversation. So event, I think, in this case is working in both levels, and it is very mundane, and at the same time it is very, very extraordinary.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think that would be a good time to take a break. So we'll finish this part of the conversation now. Please do join us for the second part, and we will talk more about Sangati then.
Thank you.